Join us.
Let's walk the talk.
This is 702.
You might have seen reports about South African soldiers that are stationed in Goma and in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They're still waiting for buses that were promised to transport them out of the area. The story is not new to you at all. Bongani Bingwa touched on it earlier in the morning, and you raised some of your views, and we thought we'll hear from people who are closer to the soldiers, especially the union that represents a number of those soldiers. Delays have been blamed on a few matters. They've said that it's lack of funds, among others. Meanwhile, about half of the military's equipment in Goma and the nearby Sake has already been moved out by a truck to Tanzania. Advocate Pikkie Greeff is National Secretary of the South African National Defence Union, and he is the Secretary. Pikkie Greeff, Advocate Pikkie Greeff, thanks for your time. Welcome to 702 once again. Good morning.
Good morning to the listeners as well.
Clearly you're not impressed by this, but you have your ear on the ground. What are some of your members saying when they complain to you about this?
Yeah, I think there's conflicting stories coming from the ground. You on the one side, you have those members who spoke to the media saying that, financial constraints are keeping the buses from arriving and that they are uninformed. And then we have other members who contact us directly to say that the authorities for the buses, the financial authorities, has already been approved. It's just a question of time. And the withdrawal plan basically consists of moving the equipment first and then the personnel. So the equipment movement is still underway, and the troops that are there are, they basically have to accept the fact that they will only start moving probably next week or the week thereafter. As soon as the equipment is gone, they'll move. It's not a question of finances at all. I've been able to establish that with very high-ranking officials this morning.
So it's not finances, is it just purely logistic?
It's logistic. Remember now, the equipment needs to be loaded by personnel, which is not a small task at all. So it's all hands on deck, so to speak. Plus, you have to keep on feeding those troops and having their own logistical arrangements in base. So personnel is needed in the base still. There's a small contingent outside of the DRC who accompanies the equipment that's traveling. But yeah, that's the situation. It's not ideal. Remember, I think one thing that we should all remember and have a lot of respect for is that those troops have been there now. It's month 16. Without seeing their families. Some of them have not been able to move, even though they had children and family members pass away. Do
we have a time frame of sorts, especially given that you have been in interaction with authorities at the SANDF, as to when this will be concluded?
Yeah, it's very difficult, on a huge logistical exercise to put exact dates. That would be very irresponsible. But I was told this morning that the troops, the personnel themselves, should start moving somewhere next week, sometime next week. Then those movements should start, if all goes well, in terms of removing the equipment.
Advocate Greeff, what is their morale like, especially of those who are behind right now? Are their spirits up, looking obviously forward to coming back home, but just generally being stuck there for one reason or the other? Give us a bit of an insight on the mood. Do they feel deflated, defeated, and somehow despondent?
I think despondent is the word, and demoralized, and very disappointed. I think that's something that came up in many of the conversations that we had with members there, is the disappointment, the feeling that they were let down all along through the entire deployment since last January, or January 2024. It's just a complete low morale. There's also a positive side. It shows you the grit of the people that is in uniform, the South Africans that are out there for us representing our country. It's not ideal situations. They're not happy, but they know they have a task to do, and I do believe they'll bite the bullet and they'll get through it.
What could have been done better? Are there any lessons to take from this that should we find ourselves in this situation again, perhaps we must turn a different chapter altogether?
Absolutely. From March last year, even the previous Minister of Defense was blaming SADC for the logistical shortcomings, such as ablution facilities that didn't arrive on time, accommodation tents, that kind of thing. And again, SADC has been dithering on this deployment. It's changed its plans. It hasn't delivered on logistical supply lines like it was supposed to. And maybe one lesson we could learn from this, and this is what a lot of military experts I see has also been saying, is that maybe if this is the way that SADC is going to support us, we should relook our future cooperation with SADC. Or at least if we are going to deploy with SADC, we should see to it that we ourselves as a SANDF are properly equipped. We have the necessary air support, logistical support of our own means and our own forces, to simplify this kind of exercise. To rely on other people who seem to be unreliable or, not always coming to the party, so to speak, it's very difficult. It leaves your troops and your forces in a very difficult situation if you don't have logistical control yourself over them.
14 minutes after 10 o'clock, you're on 702. My guest is Advocate Pikkie Greeff, he who is with the SA National Defence Union, where he is National Secretary. And we are just ventilating the issue of some members who have not returned of the SANDF. You'd remember that very horrid story of DRC and how they were just literally under siege as far as being surrounded by the local army, and negotiations had to be undertaken in order for them to come back home. There have been some delays, and Advocate Pikkie Greeff does mention that many of those are just logistical. You can't just leave your equipment there, and as far as them coming home, there is a certainty, but the timelines are not as clear as they should be right now. You could have an issue or two to raise. You're most welcome to do so on 011-883 0702. Alternatively, send your voice note to 072 702 1702. I would love to hear from you about that. Advocate Greeff, let's look at the allegations and speculations, if you will, that have been in and around. And I'm deferring to you on this one because you would have access to members. You would know far more than many of us do. And given your position at the union, fortunately, you won't necessarily be singing praises, unnecessarily so, of the SANDF. I would like to find out, people have been mentioning and bending this around that there were commercial interests of prominent politicians that were protected in the DRC over and above this mission being a SADC mission. Actually, some even claim that this is just a nice cover-up of SADC. Whether that it's there or not, it's a story for another day. But hearing from your members, were they deployed in some strategic commercial sites or areas where it could have been verified that indeed there were some commercial interests at work, more than just regional concerns?
No, what I can tell you is not that's not what we've been told. Their mission there has always been to try and eliminate the M23 influence. I know that the narrative is that they were there to bring the situation to where there can be peace talks, but the practical issue on the ground was they were always in pursuit with the DRC forces of the M23 rebels and trying to eliminate those forces. That it was a military operation, it's nothing of what we got feedback on would indicate that it was actually a cover-up for some other deeper, issue like a commercial interest or whatever the case may be. It was always about eliminating M23. Ironically, of course, we can see from the outcome that M23 was not eliminated. It's quite the opposite.
Let me ask you a question that I asked Spiwe Dlamini about 2 weeks back on the station. Do you feel that some heads should roll after this? Should people be fired right at the top? And if so, whom?
I would be very wary to make comments on that other than to say that it is quite clear that we were deployed in circumstances where we should not have been deployed because we didn't have the necessary support, logistical support, air support, and so on. If you deploy with someone like SADC, a party like SADC, and they don't deliver, it's very difficult to point fingers at our own command cadres. But there's also, we feel very strongly at the union about the fact that, a chief of a defense force, and I'm not specifically pointing out to anybody, I'm just saying in theory, ideally a chief of a defense force who knows that the expectation of a deployment is too much of a burden on what they have available in terms of equipment and support. That such a chief should be able to stand up to politicians and say this is the situation. I'm not saying that the Defence Force should refuse such political decisions. It's simply they should be very, very public about what they can do and can't do, and the fact that they are going into a very risky situation. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of leadership in the Defence Force.
Where to from now on, as far as our troops are concerned? They coming back home, and I'm sure that they'll be processed, debriefed accordingly. Do we have any psychosocial support that has been set up for them? This has been clearly traumatic, even for those who've been watching from the sidelines, more so for those who are directly involved.
I think, it's the first time in history that our troops have been in such a situation. I think even at the Battle of Bangui, that was over quite quickly, and the troops left. Sad to say, but now, 11, 12 years later, there are still some of those troops who haven't had the necessary support, psychological support, and so on, and they're still carrying the scars of those that trauma with them. The Defence Force has said that it will provide support, but we have very often learned in the past that what the Defence Force says it will do and provide is completely different from the reality once those troops return. And we're going to be as a union, we are going to be very insistent on proper psychological support for these troops. To sit there for 4 or 5 months and not know whether you'll see the light of day the next day, that is tremendously traumatic on anybody.
727021702.
Good morning, 702. 2 questions, if I may, please. First off, what were the soldiers, the South African Defence Force, doing in the Congo, first off? Secondly is, why is it whatever the South African government touches turns to manure? And plus, the other thing as well, so make it 3, is was the army there to protect Zuma ANC interests? Thank you, Jeff.
But Thabo, I really don't understand if our government had to arrange Patkos or Northwest Star or Tari from South Africa to go all the way to the Central Africa to fetch the soldiers and come back to South Africa and say, no, we could not get the buses couldn't fetch the guys. So I don't understand. How would the buses fetch the guys if they did not arrange for the buses to fetch the guys, And I really don't know, if they are arranging buses from that site in Central Africa to fetch the guys and drive all the way to South Africa, that must be arranged. Payment, they must receive invoices, payment must be made, then the buses can go and fetch those people. How do you then say the buses couldn't fetch the people if nothing was arranged?
Well, Advocate Greeff, do you want to give it a step?
I just think, it's a bit impractical to expect buses to leave from South Africa and go all the way to the eastern DRC. Clearly, not everybody is familiar with the situation on the roads. There's no highways going there. So it's very impractical. What is rather going to happen is that local buses are sourced in the DRC, and there is a road to Goma, and there is a road to the closest airport in Tanzania. So that's the most practical arrangement, and those arrangements, as I've said earlier, have been made. It's just a question of logistics now and time. The troops just have to be patient for a week or two, and those buses will take them to the airport, and they'll fly back to South Africa.
So, mission not accomplished. The status quo remains in Goma and the surrounding areas, generally in the DRC. Does it mean that we are going to see this 2.0?
I'm not sure. I think that the Defence Force should very seriously reconsider its capabilities on deployment, given the state that the Defence Force is in. 80% of our units, for instance, where we have shop stewards, have reported to us that they don't even have boots in the stores for the troops. It's a dismal situation. Our Air Force is basically crippled to the point of, being an Air Force in name only. And then, this is not criticism. This is just the reality of the situation. It's very sad. As a South African, it makes me very sad to think that things have digressed to that state. We should really work and concentrate very hard on re-establishing our Defence Force as a force of note. And unfortunately, it's not something you're going to fix in a year. To fix a Defence Force takes decades, literally. But the longer you wait, the worse it'll get.
Where do we start? Right now, given the status quo, given the current temperature inside the Defence Force, in your opinion, in your expertise opinion, Advocate Greeff, where do we start? I mean, do we start right at the top? Because some will argue that the fish rots from the head. Do we go straight to the politicians and come all the way down? Clearly, the implications are dire for such much publicized incompetence for a country such as ours.
I think it starts with the public, to be honest. I think the public must really take to heart the fact that this is our only layer of security we have as South Africans. The Defence Force is our last stand. So we should look after it, and we should be very, very insistent that the Defence Force be fixed. Secondly, I think a lot of dishonesty has surrounded this entire debacle. Media releases were made, or statements were made afterwards at press conferences, that in fact the mission was a success and the deployment was successful. Well, it wasn't. It clearly wasn't. So honesty is needed, and we need, as a public, to insist on honesty and looking the facts in the eyes. And then we need to, tone down on the egos a bit. This is my advice to the politicians and even Defence Command. Tone down on the egos. It's not about politicians and commanders being criticized. It's about South Africans being concerned that they have a proper functioning Defence Force. So listen to the people and listen to the soldiers, because they'll tell you what's wrong and they'll tell you what they need. And then thirdly, when I say let go of the ego, rope in the experts. There are many, many very, very good military experts and analysts in this country and available to this country, willing to serve this country. Pull them in, sit down, write another defense review. This time, be serious about executing it, fund it properly, and manage it properly. And that's the things we should start looking at. If we don't have that part right, nothing will ever be fixed. 0727021702. Speaking of which, this text message says, Thabo, they're saying DF, thereby taxpayers, is so overburdened by generals that South Africa is more generals than the whole of the US. This is clearly a case of too many chiefs being paid a small fortune and still not being able to deliver what is required. The generals should be held accountable for the matter of SA deployees. Another text message that came through says our Defence Force is non-existent. What are we going to do if any country declare war on South Africa? The best we can do is hoist a huge white flag. Sad, scary, and completely pathetic. Voice note.
Morning, Thabo. We are no longer in our prime when it comes to defense, and safety is like a big joke in this country. So much so that extortionists do as they please, taxi driver do as they please, prosecution non-existent, so much so that if we cannot guarantee our normal citizens' safety and security, we are failing, because security is everybody's given right. So we are failing. That from Pretoria.
Thanks, Ntate Moruti. Pikkie Greeff, as you say goodbye, let me just throw in a number of things, if you could just infuse them with the voice notes that I have read, including the one that mentions that we have too many generals at the top, and the person does mention that they are incompetent, they don't know much, but we have too many at the top who are screaming orders and not doing as much. Let's talk a little bit, we have a minute and a half, about the budget. Is it how it is spent, or do we need truly to inject more into that budget?
We do need to inject more into the budget. I see the reports about, the salaries being 60% of the budget, but that's what you'll get if you need the same amount of soldiers to operate a defense force, but you keep on shrinking the budget. It means the salary part of the budget will increase, percentage-wise. The defense budget needs to be at least 1.5 to 2% of the GDP. That's number one. That's what we should be working to, but we all know what the financial situation in South Africa is currently, but that's seriously what one has to work to. Secondly, I think there is some argument to be made for trimming the top, but it's certainly not the fact that there are many generals that, is the reason why the defense budget is insufficient. It's just purely insufficient because it's not big enough. Many of those generals, those posts are actually not really needed, and it can be trimmed down, but that won't make a significant impact on the budget. And I think also I hear people getting very negative about the defense force, but I want to assure people, the ordinary men and women of this country serve in that defense force. Their hearts and minds are really into it. All they're asking for is the necessary support from the public and the pressure from the public to see to that they are properly equipped to do their jobs.
Really appreciate your time, Advocate Pikkie Greeff, National Secretary of the South African National Defence Union.
Hanging out with Clement
on 702.
Let's walk the talk.